Good morning and warm welcome to you. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. We are so delighted that you've chosen to come be with us today. Welcome to Sustaining Hope and Self-Empowerment in our schools. Greater clarity through the IFS lens. My name is Joanna Curry-Sartori, and I'm moderating this series of 3 forums specifically focused on bringing the practice and paradigm of self-leadership and IFS to our schools. Welcome. So to begin, I'd like to ask if you would tell us where you're from and what your connection is to schools. And if you could go into the chat and share with us there. We'd love this opportunity to connect with you. So I'm going to go to the chat now. Again, where are you from and what is your connection to schools? I'm going to see if I can slide down to see. St. Louis administrator, fantastic. Who else is here? I know there's always that pause as you kind of think and then get your answer into the thing. Littleton, Rita, welcome. Germany, outpatient specialist. Pavlina, teacher in Massachusetts. Connecticut parent, designing programs. Florida. Let's see, I can't even keep up. This is exciting. School. Okay, Albany, a parent from Oxford, the UK. From Albany, New York, a school-based mental health coordinator. Fantastic, fantastic. Baltimore, Maryland, Germany, from a university. Look at, this is truly global. This is a global community and such diverse expertise in the house too. Higher education, fantastic. We are so honored to have you with us. Carol from upstate New York, welcome. Working in a charter school, fantastic. El Cerrito, California. And I know it's early there. Tim, one of our panelists, is with you in California, waking up early to be here. And Neil, who's in England, was saying the sun is setting. So in Germany, I suppose you have the same. So welcome, welcome, welcome again. Thank you for being here. So today is our second of these 3 forums, and this forum is entitled Integrating Multiple Modalities to Cultivate Self-Leadership. So today you'll hear stories, reflect, you'll sample the power and potential of self-leadership and internal family systems, or IFS, to support us to connect with ourselves and others. And this is being integrated in a variety of settings, as you'll see today, with different age students, with different educational modalities and approaches, and in diverse cultures. These forums are being generously presented to all of us by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. So the foundation is the nonprofit arm of IFS, and it's dedicated specifically to fostering healing and well-being through research, dissemination, and advocacy, as is evidenced by their extraordinary support of our many efforts to bring IFS to schools, and as evidenced by this very forum today. And while Dr. Dick Schwartz initially developed IFS as a psychotherapeutic model, as you can see, many of us hold the experience and conviction that the wisdom of this paradigm is accessible and relevant to us universally. It can truly transform our experience of ourselves and others in schools and beyond. Let me just speak a little bit more about this because it sets the stage for our forum today. At the heart of IFS is the invitation to each and every one of us to access our own great inner resource, our own self. In IFS, when we refer to self, it correlates with other terms you might be familiar with. And it's simply our experience when we're centered, relaxed, when people say, oh no, how's myself that day? In this state, we're naturally more restorative, mindful, collaborative. We contribute optimally with others. We have greater possibility to realize our full potential. And together we hold compassion for each other. When we are in self, when we are functioning from this state, we're then less likely to be self-protective, defensive, helpless, blaming, polarized, reactive, in a survival mode. This stress response and all these characteristics of it are actually not designed to be our everyday MO. And yet, as many of us have experienced lately, it seems that sometimes this has become the norm. And I'm finding myself in conversations lately with educators who just feel like they're operating in this state of stress all the time. And when we talk about, well, what do you remember? What's it like to not be stressed? What does it feel like when you're not stressed? It's almost like they can't remember. Can any of you relate to that? So we do have an option. When we lead from our core self, we have the power to connect. We have the power to see possibilities, and we have the power to solve seemingly impossible problems. Yes. And so considering the extensive and extreme challenges faced by so many these days, accessing this core capacity and this resource is essential. It's the key to learning. It's the key to healing. It's the key to change. It's at the heart of what we need right now as educators, as students, and simply as human beings on this planet. And so it's with this recognition of how significant self is and the capacity to lead from self that many of us have had the longing to discover how to bring this to schools. And so practitioners from around the world have been pioneering the adaptation of IFS and self-leadership for educators in schools. As a part of this effort, about 5 years ago, I founded the Self-Leadership Collaborative. And thanks to a generous grant from the Foundation for Self-Leadership, we've now developed a framework to bring this to schools. We've conducted program evaluation with promising results, and I've written a book about this approach, which we're in the process of publishing. And if you were able to join us for the last forum, you got to hear about these exciting developments. And in this forum, what I want to especially acknowledge is that these significant accomplishments are largely a reflection of and thanks to an extraordinary global community of IFS practitioners who every day are experimenting with how to share the gifts of IFS in schools for optimal impact. And this community, initially we were sort of finding each other in the IFS conferences and through Facebook pages and one-on-one and more informally to share our ideas. And for over a year now, there's been a group of us who've been meeting monthly to share our best practices and encourage each other and test our thinking and inspire each other's journey. And I am sincerely humbled and honored to have the company of these extraordinary global partners. And so you can imagine that I'm quite pleased that today you will have the opportunity to hear from 4 of these colleagues, each of whom is championing the experience of self-leadership in our schools in their own unique roles and communities. So let me introduce them to you now. First, I'd like to introduce Tim Amaral. Tim is an award-winning adult educator, trainer, and peer counselor from Salinas, California. He specializes in the teaching and application of social and emotional principles for adults in the classroom, in the workplace, and in the home. Next, I'd like to introduce you to John Rice, a licensed social worker who's provided psychotherapy, program leadership, and advocacy for his 35-year social work career across multiple areas of concern, including trauma, school mental health, homelessness, poverty, and chronic conditions. Through his work at the New York State Office of Mental Health, he provides restorative practice training and consultation through the internal family systems lens. Next, I want to welcome Kenna Akuna, who trains educators on social and emotional learning and restorative practices with the Morningside Center for Teaching Social Responsibility in the New York City schools. She was also a teaching assistant and a coach for the Self-Leadership Collaborative Summer Institute that we held in 2020. She's trained in internal family systems, and she integrates this process and methodology in her race equity coaching and healing work. And finally, I'd like to welcome Neil Hawkes, who's a doctor of philosophy from Oxford. He's an internationally renowned British educator, author, inspiring speaker, broadcaster, and popular TEDx presenter. He pioneered a transformational educational philosophy known as values-based education, which is a pedagogical, reflective system that gives children a transformational vocabulary based on a set of core values. His successful philosophy is now spread to schools literally worldwide and into all aspects of society as values-based living. He's refined his own understanding of self-leadership through his study of IFS and his work on the inner curriculum, which was undertaken with his wife, Jane Hawkes, who's also a fully trained IFS practitioner. And just to let you know, Inner Curriculum is a book that they've written. It's fantastic, highly recommended. So what a remarkable panel for today, right? I don't know, as I read these buyers, I just feel truly awed by the company and the expertise we have with us today. So as we enter into this time together, finally, we wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge that in our experience, IFS offers a universal paradigm. We've witnessed that individuals and communities around the world have experienced this universality and been by being inspired to cultivate self-compassion and transform their lives in diverse communities and cultures. Those of us on these three different panels together come from the United States, Europe, the Middle East, and Latin America. And with that said, we recognize the limitations of our experience, what we reflect and represent. So with that acknowledgement, we hope that you'll join us in today's presentation as a space of exploration, considering what's possible, how IFS might be beneficial and unifying for you and your community. So to support the spirit of dialogue, what we've done is we're allocating space after each presenter for you to share your reflections in the chat. And what we want to ask is to please only write in the chat when you're prompted so that during the rest of our time together, we can give our full focus to the presenters. And additionally, we've reserved time at the end for Q&A. So during the presentation, if questions are bubbling up, you can go to the Q&A tab and enter your questions there. And certainly at the end of our time together, I'll come back to invite you to offer your questions. So now, please join me in warmly welcoming Tim Amaral.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us all here today. I've been tasked with sort of welcoming everybody into their bodies so they can be present for the experience. It's one of the key elements of the work of IFS is for us to be able to stay present in our own bodies as we are dealing with whatever it is we may be dealing with, both good or bad. And so I'm going to lead you on a little bit of a guided visualization to help you settle in with us. So I do have one request. I need you with your non-dominant hand to hold the tops of the four fingers of your dominant hand. So I'm right-handed. That means with my left hand, I'm going to hold the top of the four fingers of my dominant hand. So non-dominant holds the dominant. And you can set them on the table in front of you, or if you want, on your lap, and that will be just fine. And so now, while we're holding that hand, we're going to drop in and do a body scan so we can sort of settle into our body, and I'll take you on a little bit of a journey. So we're going to start with our feet, and we're just going to feel them, whether they are cold or warm, numb or tingly. If they're like mine, they are old and they have some aches and pains. and work our way up into our calves and our shins. As we breathe slowly through our belly, we're going to in through the nose, fill the belly up, out through the mouth. We're up to our knees and our thighs. Still breathing nice and gently. We can feel ourselves sitting in the chair, the tops of our thighs, our hips. As the air fills our belly, we can feel our torso expand with that air. And we're scanning for numbness and tingling and warmth and cold and aches and pains. And it's all fine. There's nothing we need to do about any of that. We're up to the middle of our chest. Still breathing nice and gently. Out through our shoulders and down through our arms. Come to our hands, our wrists and our hands. And we can feel our non-dominant hand holding the fingertips of our dominant hand. Come up into the throat. It opens up. The face, back of the neck, up to the forehead, top of the forehead and out. Now, while you're holding that hand, I want you to feel your fingertips. Just for a moment, I want you to imagine, I want you to see yourself as a child again. You're a young child, and you're back in the classroom. You're sitting at a chair, a desk, a table. You could be sitting on the ground. And you're looking around at the other children. And this is the first day of the school year. You can feel those things beneath you as you sit, your elbows resting against your body or on the desk. You can feel the air on your face. You see new images all around you, and everything seems brand new. You might be a little nervous or a little excited, but you know everything is going to be okay. Because someone who loves you very much is holding your hand. In your mind, you look around and you see the other children. You can see that all of them will be okay. Their hands are being held too by someone who loves them. And you know that this community will support you on this journey, no matter what the challenge, no matter what's going on. Someone is holding. This group is being held. They're holding one another together. Those fingertips in the palm of your hand feel comfortable and warm. And you're all ready and set to learn. Your body's in the desk or at the table. This is the first day where it's all going to begin, and someone is holding your hand. So let's take another deep breath. We're going to walk that lovely child back to the present and let them see the world all around them. Let them know that they can handle all the wonderful good stuff that's going to come today. And let's take a breath and come back into the room. And welcome back, everybody. So I think I'm up on the slideshow, if I'm not mistaken. All right, great. Okay, so a little bit about myself very quickly. I work in Salinas, California at the Salinas Adult School. Quick shout out to my dos manitas que están aquí conmigo. So if you guys look on the list, there are two of my coworkers that are here with me, waking up really early in the morning. So that's very special. Thank you to them. So anyway, I've been there since 1992, and I work in what is called the high school equivalency program, where I'm working with adults who never got their diploma for one reason or another. And on the surface, it sounds really simple, but underneath it is cinematic. I will just say that it's cinematic. The highs and lows that we experience in that classroom are spectacular. I'll give you a little description. This is what a Monday looks like in my room. First of all, it's multi-level, multilingual. We have about 4 or 5 languages every single day going on in the room. Reading and math levels usually start at somewhere around 2nd or 3rd grade level, and they go all the way up until college level. And everybody's sitting in the room together. We have survivors of the most horrifying, complex trauma you can imagine. And that actually is where the heart of the story is going to begin. But we also have disabilities of a very, very broad spectrum. We have folks who are dealing with mental health issues. We have folks with learning disabilities. There's homelessness. We have folks who are dealing with addiction. Every day we have folks who are coming into the classroom who are either on their way to prison or on their way out of prison. We have folks who are actively involved in gangs, as well as folks who are old veterans who have found a way out. We have millionaires, and we have folks who are living on the street, and all of them are in the room together. And it's under those circumstances that the importance of self-leadership becomes really, really clear. It's not a situation where I can come in and be fragmented myself. I have to be present and available, because that is not a regular classroom scenario that they train you for when you're going through your degree in the educational system to be a teacher. So if we could go on to the next slide. So this is the reality that we face in the United States. Only 82% of entering freshmen go on to complete high school. It means we have a 1 in 5 dropout rate. That means every time you go to the grocery store, and there are 5 of you in line, one of you is not going to be somebody who graduated high school. And you want to think about how that impacts economics, how that impacts politics, how that impacts family structure and development, and who can be home for their kids because they can have a decent full-time job, and who can't be home. So it affects generations. In the town where I work, it's much worse. We have a 1 in 3 rate. And so if we could go to the next slide. This is, in my opinion, when we ask the easy question, why did you drop out? And you can see this is, in fact, I myself don't even read this because it doesn't skew, or it doesn't correlate with what my own personal experience is as somebody who's done the job for going on 30 years. But nonetheless, these are the questions that get asked as to the reason why people drop out of school. And you can see there are plenty of them up there on the screen. But in my experience, it's the next slide that counts. And this is when we ask the hard question: what was happening in your life that took you out of the classroom? And this is the statistics that prove true year after year with my population that I am working with. So I'm working with adults, so I have the ability to survey them comfortably. I don't have to get a note from their parents to be able to ask them these questions. These questions are from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And it's the 10 questions that were developed, I think, in the late 1990s, early 2000s in Southern California at one of the larger hospitals. And what they were discovering is that as they were going through people's medical history, what they found out is that the thicker their folder became, the more it correlated to these 10 questions. And so there is a direct correlation between this and 7 out of 10 major diseases in life. So when we are looking at students who are struggling in school as children, what we have to understand is there's a context in which this is occurring. When they end up in my room, they're ending up in my room, not because of that previous slide, because of what we see here. And then there are going to be outcomes that are going to have impacts across generations, because it's going to play out in terms of whether or not they can be there for their children. This also correlates to a 20-year difference in life expectancy. So if you can imagine what it's like to be a person who has experienced this degree of adversity in your life, you can imagine how difficult it would be to sit still in a chair. And so what often gets diagnosed as ADD is really not ADD. It's not hyperactivity disorder. It's the fact that kids can't sit in their own skin because it's really hard to bear the emotions that they're dealing with. That then gets passed down through the narrative inside the classroom from teacher to teacher to teacher. And the next thing you know, no matter how hard these kids are trying to do their best under very hard circumstances, and trust me, the kids are trying really hard to get through their day, the narrative becomes too burdensome. And at some point along the way, their best choice is to walk away from it all. And then they come into my room years later, quite often after very serious things have gone on in their lives. So what is it like for us to show up on a Monday and we know I, as a teacher, I'm going to be walking in with students who are highly traumatized, and they, as students, are going to be walking in, knowing that that's the story they carry when they come in through the door, and they think nobody knows about it. They think they're alone still. So if we could go to the next slide. And this is what is true in my world. The national average for ACEs across the nation in the United States is 0 to 3. 78% of the US population has 0 to 3 ACEs. In the high school equivalency classroom, we average between 7 and 10 at 73%. So you can see that when your kids are really struggling in school, it doesn't have anything to do with the mathematics. It doesn't have anything to do with the science or the vocabulary or anything else. There is an enormous amount of stuff kids are carrying. And when we don't recognize that, we end up missing an awful lot of opportunity to intervene and to be present for somebody and to make sure that we are the hand that they are holding under those circumstances. So the quote is, trauma is not what happens to us, but what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. And that trauma is manifested as a disconnection from self. So when my students come into class, they often don't have any idea who they are. They don't have any direction. They are being driven by their own desires and outside forces. But as far as their own voice that is theirs, that message has been destabilized, and there's so much static in the field, it's hard for them to figure out what's going on. So we can go to the next slide, please. So the first step in my classroom is reattaching to the self. And this is our motto in the classroom. This is when I do trainings, this is the number one thing I want everybody to take away, that we want to start with this first. You don't need an education to be of value. You need an education because you are of value. So we establish value before performance. I want you to imagine this scenario, that the day you were born, the day your child was born, you're being held in somebody's hands and they're feeling your neck and they've got your little bottom and they're looking in your face and they say, "Sweetie, I'm only going to love you if you do what I tell you. I'm only going to love you if you get straight A's. I'm only going to love you if you finally get to that great college. Otherwise, I'm not going to love you." That sounds so incongruous. And it doesn't fit what we know is that we need to be loved first, and that all the behavior flows from the love, not the performance first, then love will come later. So we established that in the classroom from the moment they walk through the door, that regardless of what their experiences are, what their background is, what has happened to them and what they have done, they have value upon entry into the room. And so we anchor all of our work in that reattaching to the self and the value and the worth that we have intrinsically, that we know is there on the day we are born. That when somebody holds us and we deserve to be held, the thing we deserve is to be loved for who we are, period. So that's how we establish it. We anchor our work in self there, and then everything comes from that. So we can go to the next slide. And so one of the things that if you were in the forum 2 weeks ago, the sentence that you often heard repeated by many of the teachers, and I just absolutely love the fact that I'm hearing that sentence, is when there is an issue that pops up in class, they're saying to the student, what do you need? What do you need? Now in my class, we work with, not just with the IFS, but we also work with David Rico's principles of the 5 A's. And we think that the fundamental needs, the relational needs that are where the crisis occurs, frankly, are in these, in attention, affection, appreciation, acceptance, and allowing. That actually becomes the vocabulary of the day. So part of what we're doing in class is we're working from self as the teacher, the presenter in the class, the parent, the authority figure, the provider. As we're that figure, what we're looking for is the ability to respond with attention, affection, appreciation, acceptance, and allowing, so that those parts that might be up inside the person, that might be triggered or activated by the experience of being in a classroom, can actually build trust because they sense that their needs are being met. And so as an instructor, what I'm looking for quite often when I see people come through the room is I'm actually scanning the other side of the column. I'm scanning for the opposing qualities, the markers of injury. And when I see those, then I have a suspicion that the need that is going to be a struggle for my student is going to be around attention. If they suffered from abandonment, indifference, or neglect, then the struggle is going to be with attention. And so as a teacher, I have to be very tender about my approach with attention. I don't want to just go blasting in because I know that's where their parts are going to be up about it. But nonetheless, that awareness on my part allows me to meet the need when the window opens. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to do a little activity with you. And we're going to learn a little bit about what this feels like. And we're only going to take a minute to do this. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have you do math. I know, as soon as I say that phrase, I'm going to have you do math. I, as your teacher who studied IFS, knows that I've just triggered all kinds of parts inside your system. So welcome to the party. All right, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to take just about 60 seconds. We're not going to take too long on this to complete the following mathematical sequence: 6, 15, 22, 24, 29, and 7. What's the next number in the sequence? And for anybody who's been through my workshop before, please don't shout it out. And if you want to type it into the chat, if you want to take a guess and just type what number you think might be next in the chat. All answers are good. I will just say that. All answers are good. The Jeopardy music should be playing in the background while we're doing this, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing a whole lot of guesses in the chat. Okay, got my first volunteer. That's good. Oh, -22. Oh, that's my favorite answer in all of my workshops thus far. That's my favorite answer. I love that. That is really good. $16. All right. 28. Okay. Chaos. Ooh, that's actually the correct answer. And let me get there and I'll tell you why. So there's nobody on earth who's going to know this answer except those who've been in the workshop with me before, are those who grew up on 1025 Elliott Street, Broderick, California. Because in the month of June, the 4 birthdays are 15, 22, 24, 29. In the month of July, the next one up is on July 7th. So the next number in the sequence would be 7. So yeah, a math problem that almost nobody on earth can solve. Not even when I do this with mathematicians, whoo, you got to see what comes up there. So now let's check back in with that body that we just did the scan with before we started. No, it's not. No, it's sabotage. So what I want you to think about is, what did it feel like when you didn't know the answer? What did you notice about your breath? What did you notice about your body? What would have happened if I had put you on stage and had you stand at the board and do that work? What happens if there is a linguistic barrier? What if this is not your native language? And then more importantly, what does powerlessness feel like? So in my classroom, when powerlessness bumps up, quite often what I'll see with my students is they'll be re-triggered back into states of powerlessness where the trauma occurred. At which point I will see them go glossy, their eyes will have the 1,000-mile stare, and none of my words can penetrate their consciousness. So I have to modify my behavior when I've seen those parts appear on the stage. And not only that, but I have to modify my behavior while trying to nurture them back into a sense of self. So that part that's been triggered, that protective part that's going to want to get them to either avoid and run away or really get defensive and push back. I need that part to step off the stage so that we can come back to a much more centered place where we can actually get the math done. So many of the techniques that I use are actually quite simple. I'll kneel down on the ground when I stand next to their desk rather than standing over them. So that way I don't have this large adult body leaning over them like somebody who may have hurt them when they were a kid. I'll turn to their friend and ask them, can you solve this? Can you help them? Can you translate for them what I just said? And last but not least, if we have the time, we will actually introduce the student to the part that came back. So they'll have the ability to work on that outside the room where therapy can occur, at which point I have a list of resources where they can step out. But the main thing in the classroom is we don't do therapy. What we want to do is get them to be able to reattach to self so they can be present for the experience of the day. And as they start to discover that there's an ability to negotiate that real estate inside themselves, they find a much stronger connection to their own identity, their own needs in life, and they start feeling empowered about their own future. So let me go one more slide. So I want to share with you my belief that in spite of the most difficult experiences, hope is just around the corner. That I've been shown time and time again by my students from the work of my peers in this great forum, that those who are counting on us, no matter what they've experienced and what they've gone through, they are eager to find hope again. And it's on us as being the person who's in there, who's shining the light on the path. That light is the source of hope that they will walk into and find their way through. And so it's terribly important for us to be able to stay present for ourselves as we're facing all these challenges, because the stuff that I'm listening for you is really, really tough. But if we can stay present for ourselves and we can stay present for them, and then they will show us, yeah, hope is just around the corner. And now watch what I can do with my life. So if we go to the next slide. So this is us. That list of descriptions that I gave you in the build at the very beginning of the presentation. This is what we turn into. Phi Beta Kappa and honors grads at our local community college. biochemists and biophysicists at our local SE university, teachers at the local state college, teachers' aides, EMTs, and the list goes on. And it ends with really, really great parents whose own kids are going to college. And I like always to end on Virginia, my one legendary full ride scholarship to the University of Santa Clara, who on the day she got her university scholarship, best one I've ever seen in my life, by the way, her 12-year-old daughter was in the kitchen as the phone call came through, broke into tears of joy and said, oh, one day I'm going to go to university too. And on Thursday, I wrote her letter of recommendation. So this is powerful stuff, guys. I hope you make a little room for self in your world. And I think that's the last slide for me, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you all for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim.
You're very welcome.
So powerful. So I want to invite you all just to take a moment to assimilate what you've heard from Tim and to reflect for yourself what's resonating inside. What's one thing that you think you'll be taking away with you from what you heard from Tim? Maybe it's something that inspired you. Maybe it challenged you. Maybe it moved you to want to act. So just sit with this question. What's one thing you're taking with you? And you can put that into the chat. And sometimes the chat moves fast, but I'll try and share out some of the things you share so that we can kind of hear it in surround sound. What are you taking with you? There's always hope and the RICO model. Yes. What else are you taking with you? If people, everyone, we can all see the answers. Love the phrase reattaching to self, hope, love from our core self is transformation. The A's. So I can't remember them all. So look up David Rico for that. Tim, I really appreciate the word of being present and centered in oneself first in order to truly witness your students, being mindful of the possibility that someone hasn't been there and on all the basic rules of the game. Yeah. And over my 30 plus years teaching, I realized that what I grew in was the ability to love my students first. Yeah. It starts with in and with us. Tim's dropping in the 5 A's. They went fast. Oops, it's flying now. Here we go. Even without any classroom experience, eventually I might be able to play a part bringing IFS to classrooms. Yeah, absolutely. The specifics of what you do at the moment of triggering, kneeling to help the student is very practical. I'm trying to scroll back. The trauma is inside. Your first standard about how they come in, being of value. Beautiful. If we adults panicked in the moment of uncertainty towards the math question, imagine what these tiny kids feel and try to calm themselves down. It's not that something. Yeah. You are of value, heart, from Anne Katrine. Beautiful. Tim, thank you. We're sending our gratitude to you out in California, up early in the morning. That was a tremendous gift. So let's take a breath. And now we're going to shift to hear from my next amazing colleague. Please join me in warmly welcoming John Rice in New York. Welcome, welcome, John.
Thank you, Joanna, Tim, all of my new friends, panelists, and all of you for joining this very special occasion today. So I come here building on the lives and shoulders of so many that have helped me in my career, and also overcoming some math trauma, which I did have still had dreams about not opening my math book for 40 years post high school. And as it turned out, it actually predestined my career. So when I was thankful enough to go for an interview at Cornell, the person said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to work with people." He said, "We have a thing called social work." I said, "Do you have to take math?" He said, "Nope." That's been my career. So, and actually it was thanks to my being able to be vulnerable and tell my mom that I had a 69 average 4 weeks from the end of the semester and was about to be kicked out of National Honor Society in my mind, which is pretty close to what might have happened. I got a tutor, and it turned things around for me. And then I said, "I'm done." So, Luke, if you want to start the slides, please. Thank you. So after being a therapist for several years, primarily around addressing child abuse, I heard about restorative justice, now broadened to restorative practices. I became a trainer and a believer that this could help change the world for the better. 20 years ago, I then heard Dick Schwartz speak, the founder of Internal Family Systems. I went up to him and I said, "Dick, I want to write about restorative practice and IFS." More on that to come. Thanks to our leadership at the New York State Office of Mental Health here in the United States, I have a dream come true. I get to share about restorative practice, integrating the self-leadership framework with a particular emphasis on supporting school staff and the community through our stormy times and beyond. And that brings us to mental health. Bessel van der Kolk, who was quoted in Tim's presentation, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps Score, says that being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. I want to live in a world where it's safe. I want to live in the world where one of my greatest joys is actually to connect. We have some ways to go. And I think that some of the stuff we'll be talking about today will hopefully help us to experience more of that together. Okay, next slide, Luke, please. So just to give a definition of restorative practice, it's not a program. It's not an initiative. It's a way of thinking and being. It's focused on creating safe spaces for real conversations, deepening relationships, and building stronger, more connected communities. The International Institute for Restorative Practices, which I've learned most of my training and been a trainer through, says that restorative practice is not a new thing on the plate. It is the plate. And whatever we call it, it really comes down to relationship. Next, please. So here's the fundamental hypothesis with restorative practices. And this is now a social science, is that when we have high expectations and we're low on that degree of support, that's when we do things to people. In the criminal justice system, that's as a friend of mine says, the trail them, nail them, jail them approach. That's the punitive approach. When we're low on expectation, low on support, that's when we're not doing things. We give up. When we're high in degrees of support and we have lower expectations, that's when we do things for people. And we're more in that permissive mode. So this is the 4 quadrants that represent the theme that there's more happiness, cooperation, and productivity. And we're more likely to make positive changes when those in authority do things with rather than to or for. And yet, we're not always restorative, at least not me. I'm a dad to a 12-year-old and newly turned 14-year-old, and had plenty of challenges. And in that role, I say I'm in a lifelong learning process led by my 2 children in parenting education. So I want to support my kids. I want to have high expectations for myself and for them. However, when I've been activated and thinking that there's a threat to any of those goals of holding them to high expectations, being a great dad, I've sometimes reacted with harshness. I've been in that punitive box. I've also reacted with shame, and felt terrible after I've been harsh with one of my kids, and seen it in my son as well. I've had a part of me that wanted to give up and just say, I'm done. I can't do anything more to engage with one of my kids. Now, I will never, ever give up. But I did have that part come up. I've also been in the permissive role. I gave my son an answer to a math problem one night when he was really struggling. There was still a second math problem to solve. He reminded me that I had helped him with a problem previously, and he had gotten an 18 out of 19 on his test. He reminded me too that the one I helped him with was the one he got wrong. So I still have some math challenges. So when I showed this diagram to Dick Schwartz, years after I said I wanted to bring IFS and restorative together, he pointed to that upper quadrant, the restorative field. He said, that's self. It took 17 years, though I think I got it. I'm going to save you a lot of time. So I now see the value of applying these same restorative principles to our inner world, even with the parts we hate or don't like so much, because they feel bad. But if we can have high expectations, work to not let those parts take over, sometimes called emotional hijack, we can care for them, be curious about them, even for myself, where it's taking years to understand what's this reaction in my body that I have that comes up, and then getting a little bit of insight and a breakthrough. We can look at these parts, even the punitive, even the neglectful, permissive parts, as they're trying to do something for us and to protect us, because they don't want us to be wounded, and they want us to help to solve a problem. And as Dick says, they're not always what they seem. So this framework helps me to know that if we can acknowledge even these challenging parts of us and give them some space, as Tim was saying, kind of ask them to step off the stage, to step back a little bit, and with understanding, with care for those parts, we can actually naturally experience more of ourself. And then that becomes an internal experience, which gets extended externally. Next, please. So Walt Whitman, I think, had this right when he said, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. No one wants to be pigeonholed into anything. You're a this, you're a that. This model, this framework says that all of us can be considered and welcome. Not all behavior is welcome. We need to stop violent and hurtful behavior. What we can do is look further underneath, though, to say, what's the inside stuff? Can we acknowledge that? I am as far from being a thought police officer as you may find. I just think we need to make space for all of our feelings, our thoughts, our sensations, and then we can make some progress. Next, please. So here is my sense of the 4 R's of self-led restorative practice. And the 4th R added to reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is a phrase used here in the States for education, is what Bessel van der Kolk says we need to add to our curriculum, and that is self-regulation. And I'm capitalizing self intentionally. When we are in this place of centering, of calm, of confidence, of curiosity, some of the 8 C's that you already seen and we'll hear more about that Dick Schwartz has come up with, that's when we become the eye in the storm. These stormy times that we have, how do we maintain that sense of who we are in our core self with all that's swirling around, all the loss that's come from the pandemic, all the challenges that we deal with and see in ourselves and in our kids and our families and our schools? Well, I think the key is to work toward this self-regulation. And when we do, next one, please, we will be better at relationship. Next, please. We will be better at increasing our ability to respond. So if I've hurt someone, it's most likely because I have a protective or a reactive part, and I'm thinking about my needs. I'm not thinking about meeting the other's needs. If I can come back and center myself and be in that quieter place, that calm place, I am then going to be able to turn my attention to do what in restorative language is called repairing the harm, where that's safe and possible to do. I am going to be better able to respond to the other's needs. Next, please. And I think this next word is the key to reducing violence, to enhancing dignity, and that is to respect or to re-spectacle someone. And also to re-spectacle those parts within ourselves. Again, to not demonize them, to work with them in a way that understands their origin, their protective nature. And the best example that I can give of this comes from my daughter and my son. Let's say conservatively, they were 3 and 4 years old. And I took the typical restorative questions, which start with what happened, what were you thinking, who's been affected, what can we do to repair the harm? And I adapted those for a 2 and 3 year old or a 3 and 4 year old. So my son sitting next to me on the floor, he had hurt my daughter. I prompted him because I was that dad that like drilled this into them. I said, how? And he said, how you feel, sissy? And she said, sad. And I said, how? And he said, how can I help you? And she said, just look at me. Respect. Just look again. Now, she will deny this as a 14-year-old. So I'm going back to her as a 4-year-old and say, I just say that was out of the mouths of babes. The profound, beautiful wisdom that came from her. See me as a sister. See me as a human being. I never gave that line. So fast forward, I get a little angry one day because my son's screaming at my daughter in the back seat, and I'm trying to uphold her, dignity and her voice because she has deferred to my son a lot. And I'm like, no, we're going to do what she wants, and then we're going to do what you want. Well, I pulled the car over and I got him out of the car. And I'm like, don't you ever do that again, just to acknowledge that little punitive part. I felt shame. He seemed to feel shame. He wouldn't let me like hug him, and he's a hugger. It took a couple hours. And we were at dinner, and all of a sudden he reached across the table. He said, I'm sorry for what happened before. That's a culmination of years and years of this kind of approach. I didn't have to even remind him how you feel. How can I help you? It just came forth from him. Yes, please. So let's finish with a little bit of love. So this photo, I actually had on my camera, and that camera was lost in a snowbank, and even when the snow disappeared, the camera didn't show up, or it's gone somewhere else. I was in a nature preserve one day in Florida, and we're going on a tour. Quite honestly, I didn't want to even go on the tour, but here it is, this profound experience. And I said to the tour guide, how is it that this turtle and this alligator are on this log together? And her response was, we feed them well. Imagine that. Nobody has to devour the other if we feed them well. Humberto Maturana, a Chilean biologist, has a phrase that I may be paraphrasing. I heard it many years ago at a family therapy workshop, and it's always stuck with me, that love is opening space for the existence of another. And I think if we apply that on our inside world, it will extend to the outer world in relationships. That's restorative. That's self-leadership, is to make space for all of that, for all of our parts, and then in turn for all of each other. Thank you.
Thank you again. Wow. Thank you so very, very much, John. So rich, so rich. Yeah, I miss being together in person so you can see and feel everybody acknowledging and our beaming faces and our full hearts. So again, I want to make the space for us to express our appreciation in words. So take another moment to pause and just reflect on what you've just heard from John. And I'm going to invite you to sit with the same question that I gave you with Tim, which is just to notice, what is one thing that's really staying with you? What is one takeaway? And you can just add that into the chat once it comes for you, but take the time you need for a minute just to digest. Pavlina said, we feed them well. I would add, feed the insides in order to feed the other just the way they need. We feed them well. That really landed there, John, really landed with us. Yeah. What else? Focus on capacity to respect. Yes. High expectations but low support equals punitive actions. Respect equals respect. Look again. Self-regulation is the center of restorative justice principles. Yes. I like the word restore, meaning get back to true self. Wonderful. Let's see. Humans are spending the millennia just trying to repair. That sometimes this work takes years, and that it is a great reminder that hope takes a slow road, and yet it is still hope. Indeed, indeed. Thank you for the opening, loving space through vulnerability, honesty, and self-leadership. Restore. Beautiful. John, thank you. Thank you so very much. What a generous offering to our community. And I know there's a few more popping in, wanting to make sure we're allowing that's plenty of time for our next two panelists. I'm going to usher us on to the next experience. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Kenna to present, and let's warmly welcome Kenna. Thank you so much for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Joanna. Hi, everybody. So happy to be here with all of you today. And with the panelists, I feel like the invitation at the beginning about learning is also happening for me, as I read the chat, as I hear my fellow panelists. So thank you. So what I want to do is share some of the work that I do within the school systems. As you probably may have heard Joanna said at the beginning, I work as a coach and also a workshop facilitator. And among the work that I do is I train public school teachers and other educators to facilitate community building circles in their classrooms, in their schools, both with students and also with other staff people, and as well as with parents in the schools. I have also been training community healthcare workers in Chile, actually, and in Puerto Rico, to manage stress and anxiety and to self-regulate, learn self-regulation techniques, and then to train others. And also, within both, work, I use and integrate IFS methodologies and also frameworks into this work. And today I'm going to share some of the ways that I integrate internal family systems, frameworks, methodology, ideas into the work that I do in training educators in community building circles. So those of you, and I heard some, I saw some of the chat that many of you seem to be familiar with restorative practices. And within the work that I do, we do not call it restorative justice, because that seems like a stronger way to connect the school to prison pipeline. And so rather than using the word justice, which is used within criminal justice systems areas, we use restorative practices, and with an S at the end, because there are many. And I think John, spoke to some of them. I think Tim also spoke to some of them in his work. And I'll, speak to some of the specific ones that, that also come from the way that we do the work within, in New York City public schools. And you've already heard this theme going through around connection, connectedness and relationships. A lot of this work is about relationships. And the other theme is like, how do we cultivate self-leadership within the schools? So my story actually refers a little bit to your last slide, one of your slides, John, around the respect part. So I was doing a training in a school in a very large classroom. This was right before COVID hit. and in the United States. And it was the first day of training of a group of educators. Many of them were from that school, and some of them were from other schools that were coming in. And all of a sudden, the bell rang, or actually, it wasn't the bell. It was like this popular song came on, and it was "Respect" by Aretha Franklin. Some of you may be familiar with this song. And so I'm listening to it, R-E-S-P-C-T, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I'm looking like really surprised, what is this? Like, why is this song on? And those of us who are not from that school, were also asking the same question with our eyes, looking around. And the teachers that were in the circle from that school started laughing. And that's when they told us that's the bell. And I was like, on the one hand, delighted. On the other hand, I was surprised, that was the bell. I was really used to, as many of you who work in schools here, probably used to those really unpleasant sounds that come on, and make us jump to move to the next, to the next class or to the next subject, make the young people jump. And what they said was, that's their bell. And the song changed throughout the day. It was not the same song. It was not the respect song. Different genres, different songs, but they were all joyful, connecting songs. And it emphasized for me that self and the self-energy is all around us, and so for me, it's about identifying, where is it already there, and pointing it out to the folks, that I'm working with. So if you can show the first slide, please. Yeah. So one of the beautiful things about internal family systems is that it gives us language and the markers to be able to identify when we are in that flow, that Joanna spoke about at the beginning, when we are within our core self, and the words that describes like these qualities, as you can see here, calmness. I'm going to try to just read them. Well, you can just read them to yourself. Are words that, like that we can, are qualities, like that we can attempt to and aim to, we can aspire to connect with, all the time within ourselves. I am noticing at the moment, one of my parts coming up, and just want to just mention it, because, seeing many different, pieces of the, like this screen is setting me off a little bit, setting off one of my parts. And so what I do, which is the same thing that I do in the classroom, is I notice around, connect back to myself, and look at whatever it is that connects me, reminds me of going back to myself. And when this happens, and I'm teaching other, like other educators, I actually tell them exactly what I am doing with you right now. Just saying, okay, this part is coming up. Let me see how I go back to my core self. And I can do that. So part of what I do, in the trainings, and you can take the slide off now. Look, thank you. Is use myself as a way to both teach and also to be able to have presence. One of the key things, and I think one of the panelists before also said it, or both may have already said it, is that when we are in self, we also invite the self energy of everybody that's around us. So creating our own presence can help us in the classroom, helps me be able to invite others to bring in their own self-presence. The way that I do that is through breath, what we did at the very beginning of just noticing our breath, noticing my own breath. What I just did now is noticing part coming up, being able to say this part is here, and then I'm going to try to move it. I'm going to try to ask it to give me space so I can just go back to my own self energy. And if those of you who saw the last forum, you may have seen one of the teachers tell a story about inviting a student to just turn around to look at a clock, an amazing clock, it sounded to me. If you haven't seen it, please go back and see it, because that's also having, us helping people connect with the body. And that also seems to have been a theme here. John mentioned about the body keeping the score, body keeping trauma, but also it's a way of being able to, connect with presence, with our inner self. And the other thing that I do in the work, like in the work with teachers and educators, is really encouraging the connection to each other. If in the slide, one of the qualities of self is connectedness. John has spoken of it already, and Tim very much, spoke about connectedness. And so it's, for me as a trainer, is connecting with my own self, inner self, with my own parts, with my own knowingness, and inviting the other, like the other people that are sitting in the circle, the other educators, the other teachers, to also connect within and also with each other. Whether it's in person or whether it's in Zoom. When it's in Zoom, we call it the circle with a Z. And in person is looking around, even when we're physically distant from each other, chairs much further away, as with masks on in some situations, it's still, like there can still be connection, particularly connection to the eyes. The eyes are the best connectors, and the heart. So want to just, underline this idea that self invites self. I think someone also said it in the chat, the importance of like being in self and coming back to our own self energy, to our own self essence, accessing it. And that self is healing. So it's a good invitation. So in terms of, like specific practices that like that connect with restorative practices, one of the things that some of you may be familiar with, which is part of the Cape Pranis's work, is the 7 core assumptions that we make about human beings. And if you can put this slide up, I would appreciate that. So 7 core assumptions are the key assumptions that we function from and create practices in community building. And when I teach the 7 core assumptions in person, I invite people to stand on either side of a classroom. One side has a sign that says agree, one side says disagree, and then to place themselves according to these practices, these assumptions. I won't read all of them, but want to just point out, like that there's like a lot of parallels between the core assumptions that we make within restorative practices about human beings, and what we also connect with internal family systems, as like what like our core self is about, and what what it's like. So in the first assumption, true self, if everyone is good, wise, and powerful, as I mentioned earlier, IFS gives us some of the indicators of self so that we know what we were reaching for. And the second one, the world is profoundly interconnected. This is definitely like a core quality of self also. And as people are standing, I ask them to connect with each other, like to also connect with themselves and with the parts, like, because different parts will have different attitudes towards, some of these assumptions. Some of them will say, no, people are not, like, not good. Not everybody's good. There may be a part, people have said that, like they may have a part that doesn't believe that everyone is good, that, or wise. There may be another part that, like is saying, I am not, like connected to everybody, or no, we're not all connected. If not, we would, be such and such. And sometimes as people are listening inside are also, to their different parts, they're also moving around to where, like they agree, disagree. So it is about teaching them about self-connection also. And want to jump to the last number 7, the last assumption. Everyone needs practices to build habits of living from the core self. And this is where the practices can be, like how we work with the parts that stand in the way, the parts that have taken on extreme roles, and to be able to help them separate and move out, like outward. I'm saying, doing this because this is like a practice that I do sometimes. It's like, okay, parts, give me space so I can be in my self energy, so I can be in my self essence. And so this is like an ongoing practice. I think someone also said it before, like that. It's like it takes a while before, sometimes it can be instant that we can be in self energy. And sometimes it's like we have to keep going back, when we notice that some part has taken over us. And I use this language, within the schools, also in the teaching, in circle agreements, like I ask people to check internally for the parts that need specific agreements, whether it's confidentiality, whether it's respect, whether it's being able to take accountability for harm done, whatever the agreement is, as like as a way to connect with ourselves, and also honor the parts that are inside of us, and be able to be in self energy as we do this work, and as teachers are in the schools working with the students. So to wrap up, I want to just mention this idea that like that sometimes we think of teachers as being, and trainers as being the lighthouse, whether it's in the classroom, or whether it's in the community, whether it's at home, and we're steering the ship, in the case of schools, students, like in particular directions. So if we're being the lighthouse, is we're accessing our own self energy and bringing that into the space. As I mentioned earlier, self invites self. So one lighthouse invites another lighthouse, and self, is self-healing, and can heal, extreme or wayward parts, and bring them back in so they can do their very best work. These parts are important for us. And the lighthouse, the self, also includes compassion and self-compassion, and a calming presence. So I want to embrace the ways that you are a lighthouse and whatever the work is that you do, and also invite for you to continue to come back to being the lighthouse, so that for each other, so we can all be each other's lighthouses. Thank you.
How beautiful, Kenna. Thank you so much. What an image to end on, the lighthouse. And how true that as we let our light shine, that it really conveys so much. So please again, feel our appreciation, our gratitude. And let's all just take a moment to pause and breathe and assimilate the richness of what Kenna has just conveyed. So many nuggets in there, so many morsels of wisdom. And notice what is staying for you. Notice what resonates. What are you taking with you? The 7 core assumptions, especially that we're all connected. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, wonderful. Core self can heal our most challenging parts of us, and we all have it. Yes. What else is staying with you? Self invites self. I'm also noticing some of you, I think, are sometimes addressing to the hosts and the panelists, and sometimes you're maybe addressing to the whole group. So I'm reading out either one so that the whole can appreciate that, but if possible, address to everyone. Connect with the self and honor the parts so they can do their best work that they're meant for. Self invites self. Yeah, we are contagious. Fight, flight, freeze is contagious, but guess what? Self is contagious too. It's good stuff. Yeah. What else is staying for you? What are your takeaways? Very powerful modeling. Your honesty and vulnerability, yes, indeed, in the process is a supermodel for us all. Being real and being able to notice, I'm here and here's how I shift. Beautiful, yes. So in light of time, I'm going to keep us rolling along. And again, if other things are bubbling up, we will have a few minutes toward the end for Q&A. Finally, knowing how to notice and attend to the self. Beautiful. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. John says, enriching, thank you, Kenna, and gave me an idea to use in my therapy groups. Well, that's the idea. We're hoping to share our best practices, spread them around, allow them to reach as far and wide as possible. So finally, thank you, Kenna. Thank you very, very much. And if you'll join me, I want to shift to welcome our final panelist for today, Dr. Neil Hawks, that I introduced previously, calling in all the way from England. And we warmly, warmly welcome you, everyone. We would be clapping if we were all together, right? Please hear our warm welcome, Neil, and over to you. Thank you so very much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Joanna. I felt all the love and warmth coming across the pond to the United Kingdom today. And I'm sitting talking to you. It's late afternoon, and I'm sitting in my study in the center of England. So, yeah, and may I acknowledge the panelists and everybody today for I've so enjoyed just listening and absorbing so much this afternoon. So thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the thousands of teachers worldwide who support a movement that I sponsor and run a charity for. It's called Values-Based Education. And these heroes, that word has already been used today, these heroes are working tirelessly in schools globally to really transform education, to bring much more self-leadership into classrooms. And I'm just seeing so many transformations now worldwide. So I would acknowledge all those wonderful people. Now, I haven't got much time today, so I'm going to screen share, and then I can continue talking. Yeah, So here's, if you want to find out anything more about values-based education, then go there. It's not a program. It's not a program that goes into a school. It's a philosophy of education. It's how to really address the culture of the school so that it is more person-centered, so it releases self-energy, etc. So please do follow that up later. Here's some British students in the city of Birmingham, and we were running a big conference at this school, and these students were saying how absolutely incredible the school was now because of values-based education. It had been a school that was in some difficulty, and the head teacher, principal of the school, had said, I want values-based education, and she developed it in the school. My aim with you today is to inspire you. It's to inspire you to really get hold of values-based education in your school districts, in your schools, and see the tremendous potential that this gives. IFS and VBE are natural partners. There's Jane, my wife, and myself with Dick Schwartz several years ago. I know Dick quite well. We've met on numerous occasions and shared platforms at conferences. And he very generously has supported values-based education and sees it as heralding in self-energy. I'm going to show you a short film of 2 minutes of a British school with lovely British accents of children in a values-based school. Now, this school is so important because it was in deep trouble. Everything was going on, and a new head teacher, principal, brought in values-based education.
That guides our thinking and behaviour. Honesty is when you have to tell the truth to someone. Integrity is knowing right from wrong. Kindness is being nice to people. Respect, because you need to respect people how you want to be treated. Curiosity, pride, confidence, courage, responsibility, self-belief. Truth means never to lie. Enthusiastic, be like happy and all excited. Resilience means you keep trying. Determination is where you never stop trying. Altruism is doing something without expecting a reward. Equality is where you treat everyone equal, no matter religion, skin color, race, or gender. I think values has made the school better because now we're being kinder to each other and we're helping each other.
Yeah, a wonderful school in the centre of England. It represents thousands of schools worldwide that are being transformed because of the introduction of a vocabulary. This journey for me started over 30 years ago when I suddenly asked the question, why are children not being given a vocabulary with words such as respect, tolerance, and all the words that the children use then. And I wondered what would happen if we introduced deliberately, explicitly, these words into a school system. And so I teamed up with Oxford University in the UK. I was a chief officer, and I returned to being a principal head teacher of the school in order to see what would happen. So we researched this over 7 years, and we were blown away with the results. We'd found incredible results because of introducing the vocabulary. At the same time, we introduced children to what I called then and still called reflection. Mindfulness now is an in word, but 30 years ago, people thought you were rather strange if you got children to sit and meditate. And we did that. And this transformation happened. Staff started modeling the values of the school. There was incredible unity going on. I wrote a book called From My Heart, Transforming Lives Through Values, which is about the journey of so many educators discovering the secret of a values-based school. And I'm going to tell you the secret in a minute. Later on, quite recently, Jane and I have written this book, which Joanna referred to, called The Inner Curriculum. I'm really thrilled about this book because it's really getting schools to think not only about the formal curriculum of subjects, but what's happening inside us, what can happen inside. And Dick Schwartz wrote in it, and we wrote a chapter about IFS and the importance of IFS in a school. Now, the secret ingredient, Jane, my wife, said, Neil, we do have a secret ingredient, and this is it. Self-energy. What do values-based schools do? They create self-energy. They allow the staff to be authentically themselves. They allow the children to be self-energized. Absolutely incredible. I'm going to give you quickly a dilemma. This is a dilemma from a school, another UK school. I saw it in a year 6 class. I'll show you the dilemma because I want you to tell me. You won't be able to because we don't have enough time, but think about what you would do with this situation. The science teacher has left out the answers to the test on her desk. Your friend copies them and offers to share the answer with you, so you both can go out rather than revise. You find science quite difficult. So just think, what would you do? Now, if we were in a workshop, I'd be fascinated to hear your answer to that. I can tell you, having asked that questions of countless groups of adults, that, dare I say, most adults cheat. They will cheat. I was astounded when I first found this out from so many countless groups, not all, of course, but the majority. Whereas if I pose that question in a values-based school where children have been immersed in values from the age of 3 or 2 or 3 or 4, then their answer is no, I wouldn't cheat. So something needs to happen to help people really embrace the values language, this vocabulary. Dick has his 8 C's. The values vocabulary goes beyond the 8 C's and includes all values that reflect positive human values, and not the limiting kind, such as greed. So that's an interesting list, which is community given. You don't impose values on people, you invite them. What are the dispositions you want from your children? And so what we find is that VB nourishes the natural essence of children and adults' self-energy. Painful experiences have an opportunity to be integrated. And the calm, purposeful atmosphere releases self-energy, nurturing ethical intelligence. I now want to give you the opportunity to listen to a British head teacher, principal of school. We introduced a course of IFS for schools with her school, which is called Worpleston Primary School in the area known as Surrey. I want to give 4 minutes to finish with to Corinne O'Brien, with her response to having had this course. Corinne. your school was the first school in England to actually go through a course in IFS for schools. What impact has IFS had on teaching and learning in the school since that course?
Oh, where do I start? So I think firstly it's important to state that children and adults alike have learnt, and we celebrate this, to be more curious about themselves and giving them an insight into why they think and behave in the way that they do. And so I think probably one of the first bits of impact that I would say is that from a planning point of view, I think the mantra has changed and it's less is more now. So teachers are planning less, and therefore there's less of an urgency to race through the curriculum, and there's more time to spend on the depth of learning. And then in turn, that's actually given more time within the school day, so that teachers are giving more time just to be and to think. Daily pause within our assemblies and within the school day, all of that combined, I think has led to a calming in our classrooms and school, not to the expense of engagement, that you'd still feel and hear the buzz of excitement of learning, but there's this underlying calmness that's definitely had a positive impact on our children and our staff. Once we started to dig a little bit deeper with IFS and looking at the different parts that we have in ourselves, and we started with staff and then we took it to the children, and the importance of welcoming every part. We teach children to be kind to themselves, and this in turn has helped children and adults to know their true self and to feel positive about themselves. By talking about parts, when we see something that we don't really want for the children, we talk about, I notice a part of you is, for example, stopping you giving this a go, or I notice a part of you is getting angry. And it feels obvious to say that now, but what that's meant is that the child's self-esteem is protected because we're just talking about that part. And I think that's helped with their engagement, as well as staff. Talking about our own parts just helps us kind of put that little part in its box, and not damage that person's self-esteem. And then finally, I think the daily pause ensures that children and staff alike are kind of constantly reflecting. I know I am doing this much more now, on what it is to be the best version of ourselves. And what pause does is it gets us to stop and reflect and just think about what are we doing, what are we hearing, what we're saying, what we're feeling when we're being the best version of ourselves, and what tiny little thing could we do a little bit better tomorrow.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Corinne, for sharing with us today. Yes, thank you, Corinne. It was an incredible experience working with her and her colleagues. And as I say, it's an outstanding values-based school, and IFS now is an integral element of the inner curriculum in VBE. So here's another values-based school. So I believe that IFS will flourish in schools that have a values-based culture and an inner curriculum that nurtures self-energy. The outcome will be something that I talk about academically, which is called ethical intelligence. Ethical intelligence is the ethical ability to self-regulate your own behavior. I believe that the leaders of the world, all of us, need to really embrace ethical leadership and ethical intelligence if this planet is going to survive over the next few generations. So self-leadership, IFS, is absolutely crucial in our education systems. And I commend it to everybody. So thank you very much for listening today. If anyone wants to know more about this work, then contact me through those websites. I will stop sharing now. Thank you, Joanna.
Wow. Yet another massive buffet. So much in there. What extraordinary work you're doing, Neil, and touching, as you said, the lives of thousands and thousands of not only the children, but the educators, the families. And we know then it spreads out to the whole community. And I know you are working worldwide with leaders and educators. So thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into all your work. I also want to reassure people that I'm going to post at the end, I'm going to post a number of links to websites, including Neil's. So it'll be in the chat in just a little bit. So it'll be easy for you to download. So let's just take a moment again and notice what from what Neil just shared is staying with you. What are your takeaways? And let's just share that out to celebrate and acknowledge and recognize what we're learning here. Carol says, rich source of more information. Malcolm says, how does such ethical education carry over to world leadership? I think that's another whole talk. Let's save that for the Q&A in just a minute. The voices of children explaining values was resonant. Less is more. Joelle, the videos, hearing directly from those impacted. It is so powerful to hear directly those videos. Thank you for that, Neil. And I know it's work to put together videos, so I appreciate that. Love the idea of an inner curriculum, which is much needed today, indeed. And I would offer that what you heard from all four panelists are versions of inner curriculum. And Neil has put it to paper in his beautiful book. What else? Oh, this one's long. Let's see if I can see it on my screen. When children are more aware of their parts and they become more compassionate towards them, they become more compassionate towards other people. When you address an issue through, oh, this is tricky to read, pointing out a part that's acting up, you protect their self-esteem. Yeah, that was from the principal. That was remarkable, wasn't it? What a testimony to the subtle but profound shift that this can offer. Yeah, and protects their sense of value. Indeed, indeed, yes. Here we call it the social curriculum. Beautiful. And we know it is just as important as the academic curriculum. Yay. Also, it's beautiful to hear that these simple actions and words have so much impact. You don't need years of therapy. No, and especially that's the whole passion we have about reaching children young. If they can integrate this paradigm and understanding of how they operate and connect to others, think of the prevention, think of the potential that they could just grow up with a greater sense of self-esteem and confidence, less shame, more connection to their values and virtues. Beautiful. Yes, the gifts of this in the school setting are remarkable. And you're just getting a taste of it in our time together today. So I want to suggest we pivot now to the Q&A. And let me kind of invite, if Luke, if you could bring my colleagues onto the screen with me so everybody gets to see the beauty of the team together here. Yes. And so as we're preparing to kind of move into this last, we have 10 minutes for the Q&A section. I wish it was more, but it'll be a little space to answer some questions. Neil, since a question was already planted, if you would please answer Malcolm's question about how this applies to world leadership. And then I'm going to take a moment to go to the Q&A. If you're sitting on a question you want to ask, please put it in the Q&A. That's a tab at the bottom of your screen so that we can know what your questions are. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you for the question. I think it's a vital question. I'm honored to be a part of a group of so-called world experts on values, and we meet as the V20 group. the V20 group writes papers on ethics to the leaders of the world through the G20. And last October, the G20 met in Italy, and I wrote a paper with Marco Travanti from America, from your country over there, Joanna. And we wrote about ethical intelligence. And we said that the problems of the world, such as climate change and all the issues that are highlighted in the 17 sustainable goals of the United Nations, none of that will come to pass unless our leaders have ethical intelligence, that ability to self-regulate their own behavior. Now, I don't need to go into details for you to realize that that's something that's patently missing from many leaders in the world. And my hope is that through the education programs, we're going to be nurturing ethical intelligence in young people. And what I found in my own research was that the first impact of values-based education and all this sort of thing is not on the children at all, it's on the adults. The adults become very engaged and they start modeling. So it does change behaviors. So yes, leaders do have to change. Unfortunately, political systems put into power people who are ego-led and not self-led. And we need a complete change around, as I say, if we're going to survive ourselves on this planet. So a big challenge for us all. But the more each one of us does what Gandhi says, that is, be the change we want to see in others, model self-leadership, as Kana was saying, just check in with yourself. I had to check myself. I can have a nervous part that can come out and make me talk too quickly. It's that constant holding up the mirror, checking ourselves, being compassionate to ourselves, though, not beating ourselves up, realizing we're a product of many, many years where we've had many experiences, and just allowing ourselves to be so that we can be that change. And then we will start voting for people who have self-energy and self-leadership. And can you imagine the world if we were like that? It would just transform. That's my vision and my hope for the future. Thanks, Joanna.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Neil. And again, just a glimpse into the scope of all that you're doing. So thank you for planting that seed for us. So there are a few questions coming in, and in order to kind of tap into them, I'm going to suggest as panelists that we'll just be fairly succinct in our response. The first is for you, Tim. There was someone who, during your meditation, as I understand it from her question, had experienced that she had a young part that was having trouble, that she didn't have an experience of connecting to parents and educators. And she was wondering if it's possible to consider how to adapt that meditation for people who perhaps have had a traumatic experience as children and have trouble recalling somebody there to hold their hand. So what are your thoughts on that?
So this actually comes up in class quite often, because as we're working towards self-regulation and sort of getting settled back into being present in the classroom, a lot of models will often refer back to some caring adult, but I gave you the list of what my experiences are, or my students' experiences are in their life, and many of them, the fact that they survived to adulthood to get to me is an incredible accomplishment on their part. So I am keenly aware of the possibility that there may not have been caring adults that were present on any significant level, and that it was through the child's own sense of resourcefulness and their own powers and adaptability that they were able to get to where they are today. And so the adult that I'm actually having them have their hands held by is self. It's not people outside. It's not other caring parents or caring teachers or anybody else. It is their own self who is the best able to respond to what the needs of that younger part might be. Thus, their own self is the thing that can hear what the need might be, what the fear might be, what the distress might be. And so The other way we will also do this is if folks feel very compelled to have it be attached to somebody outside themselves. In other words, they need the metaphor to be for an external adult, an external character. Then what I say is, then I would ask you to have the person who's holding that hand be the adult you always wished you had in your world. And so you can imagine that person fairly comfortably. If that person could really be present for you, as John was saying, respect you and see you and have all those values that Neil was talking about and all the connection that Kenna was talking about, if they can be full of that energy, then that's the adult I want you to see holding the hand of the child in the meditation. And Joanna, your mic is off.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge, as you say that of course, part of the art of this is appropriately adapting it to different ages who have different capacities for internal reflection and are at different points in their development of attachment to external figures and their capacity to attach internally. And so we can't get into all the nuance of that. So Tim is, of course, speaking in part with his expertise in adult education. So I just want to name that, although we're not diving into it. So kind of a question at the other end of the spectrum, let me just go back over to the question is, how do you, what's your experience with applying this for people who are less explicitly traumatized? Even though, you know, they've had maybe difficult experiences, less dramatic, they may be less aware of trauma. So what's the difference when you think about how is this relevant? How is it applied for students in general? What's the benefit in general? Would somebody like to briefly comment on that kind of end of the spectrum, just acknowledging this truly is beneficial to the entire community?
So I can take that on if you'd like.
Sure.
So the way we couch it in my classes, we actually speak about this explicitly. We talk about this out loud in class. It's one of the ways that we learn how to engage in the act of being seen, because it's not just seeing somebody else, it's allowing ourselves to be seen. And so as we talk about it, I will often have quite a few folks who are either unable to recognize the trauma they've experienced, or maybe they just didn't experience much and they're in my room for a completely different set of circumstances than the vast majority of students in my room. So we have to make room for that because all parts are welcome into the circle. That's absolutely the case. So one of the ways that we do this is we break down the difference between neglect, abuse, and trauma, and we get that vocabulary so that we can all sort of sense a time in our lives where our need was not met. May not necessarily qualify as full-on trauma, but our body still has that feeling of what it means to have a need that's unmet. And in fact, we can think of it as breakfast every day. We wake up in the morning and our need comes up. It's reborn every morning. And the question is, do we meet that need in a healthy way, or do we meet it in an unhealthy way, or not at all? And so it becomes this great conversation about how to stay present for what our own needs are. And if the trauma history is there, then we can see how the challenges will be around meeting those needs. Whereas if there is no trauma history there, then quite often what we just need is a set of resources, the ability to express it and then get support around it.
Great, thank you, Tim.
Well,
question for Kenna that I see here in the chat. Kenna, what type of follow-up is provided in your training sessions?
Yeah, so, and thank you because for that question, because I think that follow-up is important, after introduction. So schools can sign up to get coaching for the teachers and for people that participate in the trainings. I'm not always the person that does the coaching. Sometimes I am, and then I can work specifically with specific teachers around how they bring that into their classrooms or into their staff meetings. But that, and sometimes the follow-up is just through phone calls.
So I'm going to invite John to answer this question. I think everybody could comment on this, but I'd love to hear John's voice again. How do you return to self when you are triggered in the moment of teaching or parenting? So what's one of your tricks, John?
Well, the one incident that I shared about, with my son, I got very quiet, and because he was quiet. And I had to deal with that sense of shame that I just felt terrible. And then I did my best to try to re-engage, and I gave him space. I was like, can I give you a hug? No. This is a kid who wants a hug all the time, most of the times I've been. So it was just being quiet and trying to deal with that part. And it's so hard. One of my people I've learned a great deal from is this psychiatrist, Dr. Don Nathanson, who talks about shame. And he said, if we can bring that sense of love to that part that's shamed, it will go away in a picosecond. I think that's less than a second. Because it points out something to us that's just about us being human that we don't want others to see. It's really hard to do. Sometimes I take a rest. Sometimes I'll just take a rest until it kind of passes and give myself that kind of break. Those are a couple ways. And I talk with other people and get their support. Thanks for the question.
Great. Neil, I saw your finger up, and this will be our final comment, and then we're going to wrap up for today. Yes, Neil.
It just, as John was speaking, it just made me think of the passing, I think, today or yesterday, of Thich Nhat Hanh. Many of you will know of his incredible work. He's one of the masters that has really influenced my thinking over many years. But I always remember reading in a book of his, he talked about the breathing room. He said, when you start losing it with one another, just make sure you take space. Have a designated part of your house, perhaps, that when you go there, other people don't interfere and they don't shout. So it allows you to calm your parts down and return to self. So it's wonderful that I have this opportunity to acknowledge Thich Nhat Hanh today. Very sad he died at 95 today or yesterday, depending on where you are in the world. So an inspiration, as IFS is an inspiration too. Thank you, Joanna.
Fabulous. Yes. And what you touch on too is that I think there's two components to that capacity to reset in the moment. One is having more extended time where we go to our breathing room or a meditation practice or a walk in the woods, where we really reset and recenter and reintegrate our system so that on the fly, in the moment, when things happen, the Zoom link doesn't work and the kids are flipping out or whatever it may be, that we then can harness micro practices, as Kenneth said, to step back and breathe, to step back and notice what's activated inside, to step back and be able to ask our parts to give us a little breathing space. Okay, I get you. I know that was tough. I can handle this. And then we can step back into the flow. And I love, Neil, when your principal was speaking about they daily take time to pause. And if we can proactively build that into the fabric of our schools, our children learn from day one that they have that power, that even when our buttons are pushed, hijacked, conflict, difficulty, difference of perspective, polarization, we have a choice. We have the power in that moment to come back to our center. So this has been a tremendously rich morning. I want to again thank each of you with all my heart, not just for everything you've shared today, but the evidence the testament this is to your lifetime of work, your professional dedication and work, and your personal inquiry and endeavor, which has made it possible for you to be here with such profound impact and integrity. So thank you so much to each and every one of you. And I know that I imagine at least many or some of the people with us may be interested or curious about more. Somebody had questions about how can you explore bringing this into your schools? What if they don't know anything about IFS? As I think you can gather, we're in different locations approaching this in different ways. So what I'm going to do right now is I believe I'm going to press return. So I just put in the chat a number of different links for you. So if you'd like to reach out to Neil about values-based education, you can. If you'd like to reach out to me about the way that I've been bringing this into schools in the United States, you're warmly welcome to do so. Again, that link is the Self-Leadership Collaborative. What I've also done is under the team section on the collaborative, you can see the bios for all of our presenters and their contact infos there. So it's kind of one-stop shopping on the team page in the event you can't catch it all right now. But we do have numerous upcoming events and workshops. We're really eager to keep this dialogue alive, to build community, to be a resource to educators around the world, a place to first and foremost nurture and attend to our own inner lives, our inner curriculum, our inner well-being, so that we can be there to even more fully care for our young people. So upcoming this spring, we're hosting these kind of drop-in community practice sessions. There's going to be one with Tim and one with John. Imagine if you could have a full hour guided reflective practice in community with them. And there'll be other upcoming introductory events and workshops. So you're welcome to check that out. Also, we have one more in this series of forums, and the next one is going to be a panel of mental health providers who are coming into school systems in a variety of ways, IFS practitioners who are highly innovative and creative, and it'll be yet another glimpse into how this work can happen. Trying to think, I do want to mention that when you register for the forums, there's two different buttons. We want it to be free and open to the public. Everybody's welcome, as many people as can, to join. So simply press register and you're in. The work of the foundation is generous and phenomenal and extensive. They're really making a lot of this work possible. So if you're interested in donating, you're welcome to do so, but that is certainly not required in order to join these forums. Finally, we would be very interested to hear your feedback and reflections on this event. So you'll notice that the last link I put says feedback form. If you click on that and download it, it's a Google form, and you can simply share what's resonating and landing, and also curiosities, feedback, suggestions, how we can continue to move this work forward and support you, perhaps meeting your needs for ongoing learning. So with that, I want to thank all of you for coming, for your sustained interest, your resonance, your shares, your questions. I know we didn't get to all the questions. I'm simply hoping that as we weave an ongoing community together, we'll have that space to continue to come together, for you to ask your questions, for you to share your experience and insight. And again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. So speaking to Neil's vision, may we really discover how to access and harness the power and gifts of self-leadership as a mechanism to not only uplift our schools, but heal our planet. Thank you, dear friends. Take good care, and I hope we see you again soon.